The story of the Knights Templar is one of the most intriguing in all of history. An order shrouded in mystery, full of power, wealth, and a dramatic downfall that still echoes through the ages. The Order of the Knights Templar, formed in the early 12th century, rose to prominence during the Crusades, accumulating vast wealth and influence that stretched across Europe and beyond. Their sudden fall in the early 14th century, however, left the world with far more questions than answers. Officially, the Templars were accused of heresy, sodomy, and various other crimes, but their demise has sparked centuries of intrigue, speculation, and conspiracy theories. What's often overlooked in these stories, however, is the role of women. The history we know is almost entirely focused on the male knights, warriors who swore oaths of poverty, chastity, and obedience. They became the symbols of the Templar order, stoic, devout, and relentless in their pursuit of the Holy Grail and the defense of Christendom. But if we dig deeper behind the veils of history, we begin to uncover evidence that challenges the official narrative, pointing to a much more complex picture. Women, often completely omitted from traditional accounts of the Templars, may have played a much more significant role in the order's secrets, its power structure, and even its mystical practices. For centuries, the Templar Order has been depicted as a male-dominated institution, driven by the ambitions of men seeking both spiritual enlightenment and material wealth. This is the narrative we've been taught. But what if that story is incomplete? What if women were not only present in the order, but perhaps even wielded hidden power? These questions have been mostly overlooked by mainstream historians, who have dismissed the idea of female involvement in the Templars as fanciful or inconsequential. Yet, evidence begins to emerge that suggests women were not just passive figures in the background, but active participants, possibly even central players in the Templars' greatest secrets. In the medieval world, women were often relegated to the background in historical accounts, their contributions either overlooked or deliberately suppressed. The patriarchal society of the time did not lend itself to recognizing women as leaders, warriors, or intellectuals. This societal structure, coupled with the church's influence, led to the erasure of the roles that women may have played in the most powerful and secretive organizations of the time. But as we start peeling back the layers of history, we find traces, small clues, whispers in the shadows that point to a very different reality. Could the Templars have hidden female members who played vital roles, both in the Order's day-to-day operations and in its most sacred and guarded rituals? Consider, for instance, the legends surrounding the Holy Grail. Many of the most famous Templar myths center around this powerful and elusive relic. For centuries, historians, scholars, and adventurers have speculated about the Grail's true nature and location. Was it a physical artifact, a symbol of divine power, or something much more abstract, like a repository of ancient knowledge? Whatever it was, the Grail is intimately tied to the Templars, and some theories suggest that the Order's real purpose was to protect and uncover its secrets. In these theories, the Grail is often associated with feminine symbolism, divine femininity, fertility, and the sacred feminine. This brings us to the fascinating possibility that women played a pivotal role in safeguarding the Grail, perhaps even being its chosen protectors. The popular image of the Templars is one of a strictly male society, built around military discipline and chivalric values. However, this narrative fails to account for the many gaps in the historical record, especially when it comes to the lives of those outside the official male hierarchy. While the Templars did indeed have strict rules regarding the entry of women into their ranks, women were not allowed to join the order as full knights. The presence of women within the order's sphere of influence cannot be so easily dismissed. In fact, there are historical accounts, although scarce, that point to the possibility that some women may have been more deeply involved with the Templars than we've been led to believe. One such possibility is the idea of female Templar daughters or affiliates, women who were not full members of the order but still held some kind of secret position or responsibility. These women could have been the key to the Templars' hidden knowledge, guiding the order through spiritual and mystical rites, or perhaps even controlling vast portions of its wealth and power behind the scenes. We know that women in medieval Europe often held great influence in the church, in courts, and within noble families, but their roles were often invisible to the chroniclers of the time. Could it be that these women, closely tied to the Templar elite, helped steer the order through its most turbulent times? Could they have been key to maintaining its secrecy and ensuring the survival of its hidden legacies? Moreover, there's evidence to suggest that the Templars had connections with certain female saints and mystics whose stories were often suppressed or forgotten by mainstream history. These women were not just spiritual figures, but were deeply involved in the intellectual and religious currents of the time, currents that may have been shared with or adopted by the Templars. If we look beyond the typical accounts of Templar history, we can see that these women might have provided the necessary spiritual guidance and protection that enabled the order to carry out its mission. The centrality of women in the Templar narrative is not just about a forgotten history. It's about rediscovering a lost piece of the puzzle. If the Templars did indeed hide the roles of women within their ranks, then what other secrets were concealed along with them? What knowledge, power, or artifacts did these women guard that the Templars themselves believed to be too dangerous to reveal? And, more intriguingly, could these women have been the true inheritors of the Templars' most sacred legacies, an inheritance passed down through generations, hidden from the public eye, and erased from history? As we begin to delve deeper into this story, we'll examine the lost roles of women within the Templar Order, how they were erased from the historical record, why their contributions were ignored, and what secrets they may have taken with them to their graves. Along the way, we'll uncover not just the hidden lives of these women, but also the hidden truths they were protecting. What we uncover may change everything we thought we knew about the Templars and their legacy. The truth about the hidden women of the Knights Templar is not just another chapter in history. It's a revelation that could reshape our understanding of the past, the present, and the mysteries that continue to haunt us. The Knights Templar have captured the imagination of historians, conspiracy theorists, and curious minds alike for centuries. Their mysterious rise, unparalleled wealth, and sudden fall make them one of the most captivating and enigmatic orders in history. Founded in the early 12th century, the Templars began as a small group of knights seeking to protect Christian pilgrims traveling to the Holy Land during the Crusades. However, over the course of their existence, they evolved into something far more powerful and influential, with a reputation that stretched across Europe and beyond. To understand the role of women in the Templar Order, it's crucial first to grasp the Order's origins, its rise to power, and the key factors that contributed to its mystique. The story begins in the early 1100s, a time when the Crusades were in full swing. Christian forces, having captured Jerusalem from Muslim control, sought to protect the sacred city and its surrounding territories. The Templars were originally founded by a small group of knights led by Hugh de Payens, a French nobleman. Their mission was simple: to offer protection to Christian pilgrims traveling through the dangerous roads leading to Jerusalem. They were granted a headquarters on the Temple Mount, which is where the name Knights Templar comes from. However, what started as a humble mission grew into a massive and highly organized military order. By the early 12th century, the Templars had grown significantly in size and influence, attracting many wealthy patrons and supporters, including European monarchs and the papacy. The order's military prowess, their highly disciplined knights, and their strategic alliances made them a force to be reckoned with. But the Templars were more than just a military organization. They quickly established themselves as skilled financiers, using their network of castles, estates, and holdings to accumulate vast amounts of wealth. It was during this time that the Templars began to act as an early form of international banking, issuing letters of credit and facilitating transactions for wealthy merchants, pilgrims, and even kings. This financial network made the order immensely powerful, with the ability to move vast sums of money across Europe and the Holy Land. Despite their rapid rise to power, the Templars were not only military knights and financiers. Their spiritual and religious role was deeply intertwined with their mission. The Templars took vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience, and they were dedicated to the protection of Christianity. The order's members were bound by a strict code of conduct and discipline, living a life of monastic devotion while also engaging in combat. It was within this dual identity, warrior monks, that the Templars cultivated an aura of mystery and reverence. At the heart of their religious devotion was a deep connection to the Holy Grail, a central symbol of Christian lore. The Grail, often associated with the Last Supper and the bloodline of Christ, has captivated the imaginations of countless people for centuries. Some believe the Templars were tasked with guarding the Grail, either physically or spiritually, and that their mission in the Holy Land was as much about uncovering the secrets of the Grail as it was about military conquest. This mystique surrounding the Grail became an integral part of Templar mythology, adding an element of esoteric knowledge and power to their public image. Throughout the centuries, the Templars' role in the Crusades and their financial dealings with European monarchs placed them at the center of a web of political intrigue. The Knights were often entrusted with important missions by kings and popes, gaining the trust of the most powerful men in Europe. Yet, despite their prominence, the Order's rapid rise to power began to arouse suspicion. The Templars' growing wealth, their seemingly unassailable position, and their secretive nature made them targets of both envy and fear. This fear would come to a head in the early 14th century. In 1307, King Philip IV of France, who was heavily indebted to the Templars, sought to seize their wealth for himself. He accused the order of heresy, blasphemy, and other heinous crimes. With the backing of Pope Clement V, Philip orchestrated the mass arrest of Templar knights in France, leading to their torture and eventual execution. The order was officially disbanded by the Pope in 1312, and its assets were seized by the crown. But despite their official dissolution, the Templars did not vanish entirely. Many believe that the order went underground, continuing their secretive activities through other organizations, such as the Freemasons. The dramatic fall of the Templars raised more questions than it answered. What was the true nature of the order's activities? Was their wealth simply the result of savvy financial dealings? Or was there something more, something hidden in their sacred and esoteric practices that the Church and the monarchy feared? The sudden disappearance of the Templars left a void that has fueled conspiracy theories, legends, and speculation for centuries. The key question that many still grapple with is this: what was the Templar Order really about? Was it just a military group, or were there deeper, more mystical elements at play? This question of secrecy and hidden knowledge forms the basis of a theory that there was more to the Templars than what was revealed to the public. While the male knights are often the focus of mainstream history, there are persistent whispers that suggest the Templars' greatest secrets were not only spiritual, but also tied to ancient wisdom and rituals that involved women. These hidden aspects of Templar history have been largely ignored or suppressed, but they may be the key to understanding the Order's true legacy. What makes the Templars so fascinating is not just their rise and fall, but the layers of myth and intrigue that have surrounded them for centuries. The legend of the Grail, the connection to mystical knowledge, and the secretive nature of their operations have all contributed to the Templars' enduring mystique. However, as we begin to peel back the layers of this history, we see a much more complex picture emerging, one that includes the often overlooked role of women in the Order's legacy. By examining the Templars' early beginnings, their rapid growth, their financial acumen, and their esoteric practices, we begin to uncover a story that is far richer and far more mysterious than the traditional narrative has ever suggested. The official narrative surrounding the Knights Templar is one of the most enduring and pervasive myths in the history of medieval Europe. It is a story built around the image of a male-dominated, monastic military order, a brotherhood of knights bound by sacred oaths, devout in their Christianity, and singular in their mission to defend the Holy Land and safeguard Christian pilgrims. These men, who live by a strict code of conduct, have become icons of chivalric virtue and knightly honor. However, this narrative, which has been promoted for centuries, conceals a deeper, more complex story, one that is only beginning to be understood. For much of history, the role of women in the Templar Order has been deliberately overlooked, or worse, erased. The most widely accepted historical account of the Knights Templar emphasizes their role as warrior monks, driven by military objectives and religious zeal. The order was founded in the early 12th century during the Crusades, a time when Christian forces sought to recapture Jerusalem from Muslim control. The Templars were originally formed as a military order tasked with protecting Christian pilgrims traveling through dangerous lands. They were given their name because their headquarters were established on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. Over time, the Templars grew in power, wealth, and influence. Their reputation as skilled warriors and devout religious men made them an essential part of the Crusader states in the Holy Land. What stands out in the official narrative is the emphasis on the male-dominated structure of the Templar Order. The Knights took vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience, and their lives were dedicated to the military cause and the defense of Christianity. The Order's hierarchical structure was rigidly patriarchal, with the Grand Master at the top, followed by various knights, sergeants, and other ranks. The knights themselves were expected to maintain a strict level of discipline, adhering to a set of rules that governed everything from their behavior on the battlefield to their daily spiritual practices. The Templars' strict code, combined with their martial prowess, led to their fame as some of the most formidable warriors of the medieval period. The public image of the Templars as religious zealots and military men has been deeply ingrained in popular culture. Books, films, and documentaries have perpetuated the image of the order as a brotherhood of chivalric knights, bound by their oaths and motivated by their faith. This view has been so pervasive that it has become almost impossible to separate the Templars from the idealized image of the medieval knight, a figure of valor, honor, and masculinity. Yet, in focusing solely on this narrative, much of the complexity of the Templar Order has been obscured. The history we've been taught has omitted the presence of women in the Order's world, despite the possibility that women played far more central roles than we've been led to believe. The very structure of the Templar Order seems to exclude women. The Order's official rules and regulations, known as the Rule of the Templars, clearly state that only men could be admitted as knights. This has led many historians and scholars to conclude that women had little to no involvement in the Templar Order, and that their role was limited to serving as benefactors or supporters, rather than active members. The rule also made clear that women were not allowed to live in the Templars' military quarters or participate directly in the Order's religious and martial activities. In essence, women were relegated to the margins of Templar life, with their role largely limited to the periphery. Yet, despite these clear regulations, there are persistent rumors, legends, and even historical accounts that suggest the reality was more complicated. There are suggestions that the Templars may have had a secretive relationship with women, one that went far beyond mere patronage or charity. Some theorists believe that there were hidden, female counterparts within the Templar Order, women who were intimately involved in its spiritual practices and the preservation of its most sacred knowledge. These women may not have been knights in the traditional sense, but they were possibly influential in the Templars' inner workings and may have held key positions of power, especially when it came to guarding the secrets of the Grail, alchemical wisdom, and other esoteric teachings. The notion that women were entirely excluded from the Templar Order is not just a matter of historical oversight. It also reflects broader societal attitudes during the medieval period, where women were often seen as spiritually inferior or unsuitable for roles of power and authority. The Catholic Church, which wielded immense power during the Middle Ages, was notoriously patriarchal and often relegated women to secondary roles. This was true not only in the Templars, but also in the broader church and society at large. Yet, despite these barriers, there were a number of women who defied these conventions and became influential figures in their own right, often working behind the scenes in ways that were not immediately obvious. This brings us to the heart of the Templar mystery. If women were not part of the official Templar Order, then where did they fit into the larger story? Some scholars have suggested that the women associated with the Templars were not members of the order itself, but rather part of a broader network of supporters, partners, and protectors. These women could have been noblewomen, widows, or daughters of wealthy patrons who maintained close ties to the Templars. They might have helped fund the order's activities, sheltered Templar knights in their homes, or acted as intermediaries between the knights and other powerful figures. In some cases, these women may have even held direct influence over the Templars' decisions, especially when it came to spiritual and mystical matters. The absence of women in the official Templar narrative may also be a reflection of the deliberate erasure of female influence from history. The male-dominated chronicles of the time often failed to recognize the contributions of women, even when they were vital to the success of the order. This pattern of suppression was not unique to the Templars. It is a broader trend in the history of secret societies and powerful organizations, where the roles of women are often downplayed or obscured. Women's contributions to these organizations were often seen as secondary, and their involvement in secretive matters was dismissed as unimportant. However, the growing body of research and alternative historical theories suggest that women may have been far more involved in the Templar order than previously thought. Some even argue that the Templars, in their secretive and mystical practices, may have had a hidden feminine aspect that was deliberately concealed. Could it be that the official narrative of the Templars, with its focus on male knights, was part of a larger effort to suppress the role of women in history? And if so, what was the reason for this suppression? What secrets might these women have known, and why were they deliberately left out of the story? As we delve further into the Templar mystery, we begin to unravel the layers of this patriarchal myth. The more we explore, the more we realize that the real story of the Templars may be far more complex and far more inclusive than history has led us to believe. What we uncover may challenge the very foundations of the Templar narrative and open up new possibilities for understanding their true legacy. The Middle Ages were a time when societal structures were rigidly defined and power was predominantly held by men. Women were often confined to domestic roles, with little freedom to exercise political or intellectual influence. Their contributions, even when significant, were often dismissed or obscured by the patriarchal lens that dominated medieval life. However, within this restrictive environment, women still managed to carve out spaces for themselves, even if those spaces were often hidden or overlooked. The story of women in the Middle Ages is not one of passive submission, but of survival, subtle influence, and sometimes remarkable power, albeit in ways that were seldom acknowledged by contemporary historians. Medieval society, deeply shaped by the church and feudal systems, imposed strict boundaries on women's roles. The ideal of womanhood, as defined by religious and social authorities, was one of purity, submission, and motherhood. Women were expected to marry, bear children, and run households, roles that were deemed their sole purpose. The very structure of medieval Europe, with its focus on family lineage and inheritance, placed men at the forefront of political and economic life, leaving women to manage domestic affairs and work within the boundaries of the home. However, it would be a mistake to assume that all women accepted these confines without resistance or influence. In the world of the aristocracy and nobility, women still held significant sway, although their power was often exercised in less visible ways. Noblewomen, for example, were frequently responsible for managing estates and the economic well-being of their families. While men were away at war or engaging in political machinations, women often held the reins of power in their absence, making decisions that impacted the lives of hundreds or even thousands of people. They were not only guardians of family wealth and property, but also central to the social and political strategies that governed their regions. In some cases, women acted as regents for young sons who were heirs to thrones, wielding immense authority during their temporary rule. Even within the church, which was one of the most powerful institutions of the time, women found ways to exert influence. While the medieval church was a male-dominated institution, with its hierarchy of bishops, priests, and popes, women were not entirely excluded from religious life. Many women became nuns and entered convents, where they could pursue intellectual and spiritual endeavors that were largely closed off to them in the secular world. Convents were often centers of education, culture, and even political power, and some women found avenues for intellectual and artistic expression within these religious spaces. Figures like Hildegard of Bingen, a renowned abbess, mystic, and scholar, exemplify the significant role women played in the intellectual life of the time. But it was not only in the religious or aristocratic spheres that women were active. Women's roles in the broader medieval society, though often underestimated, were just as crucial. From running markets and small businesses to serving as midwives and healers, women provided essential services and contributed to the fabric of medieval life. Their work, although frequently relegated to the domestic or unofficial realm, was indispensable to the functioning of society. Despite the lack of formal recognition, women were deeply involved in the cultural and economic life of the Middle Ages. One of the most fascinating aspects of medieval women's roles is their relationship with the mystical and spiritual traditions of the time. The Church's teachings may have relegated women to passive roles, but the mysticism that permeated medieval Christianity allowed for the emergence of powerful female figures who held sway over their communities. Some of these women were revered as saints, others as mystics or visionaries. They became conduits for divine wisdom, healing powers, and spiritual guidance, and their influence often transcended the male-dominated institutions that sought to suppress them. These women, many of whom were closely involved with the Templars, were central to the spread of Christian mysticism and esoteric traditions during the Middle Ages. It is no coincidence that some of the most famous female saints of the period, such as Joan of Arc and Catherine of Siena, had visions and spiritual experiences that were believed to be direct messages from God. These women, though not knights in the traditional sense, were seen as empowered by divine forces. Their spiritual authority often gave them access to realms of power that were otherwise closed off to women in the secular world. This brings us to the intriguing possibility that some of the women involved with the Templars were not merely passive observers, but active participants in the order's spiritual practices. Just as medieval mystics were revered for their visions and knowledge, could certain women have had access to the same esoteric wisdom that was passed down through the Templars? Women in medieval Europe were often seen as the custodians of hidden knowledge, whether in the form of healing practices, herbal lore, or spiritual wisdom. The Templars, who were deeply involved in the mysteries of the Holy Grail and the sacred feminine, may have turned to certain women to help guard or even interpret this hidden knowledge. These women may have held the keys to the mysteries the Templars sought to protect, passing their knowledge down through generations, either openly or in secret. Despite the fact that history often excludes women from the more prominent roles in the medieval world, their contributions were critical to the functioning of the societies in which they lived. It is important to remember that women, even in a patriarchal society, often found ways to subvert the restrictions placed upon them. Whether through their involvement in the church, their political influence, or their deep spiritual and mystical knowledge, women played an essential role in shaping the world of the Middle Ages. The Knights Templar, with their focus on secrecy, hidden knowledge, and spiritual power, may have recognized the value of these women and incorporated them into their ranks in ways that have been hidden from history. By understanding the role of women in the broader context of the medieval period, we can begin to see that their contributions were not merely limited to domestic duties or passive support. They were active participants in the spiritual, intellectual, and even political realms of their time. Their roles were often concealed, and their power was frequently overlooked, but it was no less important than that of their male counterparts. The true history of the Templars, when viewed through this lens, begins to reveal a more nuanced and complex picture, one in which women were not only present but central to the order's mission and legacy. The suppression of women's roles in history is a pattern that repeats itself in many societies, and the medieval period is no exception. However, as we uncover the hidden history of the Templars and their connections to powerful women, we begin to understand just how significant these women were to the order's success, to its spiritual practices, and to its ultimate fate. The story of women in the Middle Ages is not one of subjugation, but of strength, resilience, and quiet power. And in the case of the Templars, these women may have been the unsung heroes whose influence shaped the course of history in ways that have been long forgotten. The Knights Templar have long been associated with the image of the valiant, chaste male warrior, a brotherhood bound by sacred oaths and lofty ideals. But this image has obscured a more complicated and far-reaching story, one that suggests the presence of women within the Templar Order, women whose roles were hidden in the shadows of history. While mainstream accounts of the Templars focus almost exclusively on their male knights, there are whispers and fragmentary historical records that point to a secret network of women who were integral to the Order's true mission. These women, sometimes called the hidden daughters of the Templars, were not merely passive supporters of the Order, but active participants, possibly even guardians of its most sacred and secret knowledge. The role of women within the Templar Order has been one of the most overlooked aspects of Templar history, yet there are signs that suggest their involvement was far more substantial than we have been led to believe. The most well-known aspect of the Templar Order is its military prowess, but beneath the surface of this martial identity lay a complex network of relationships, alliances, and spiritual practices. Could women have been a part of this network, playing crucial roles that were either intentionally erased or left unrecorded? The answer may lie in the hidden history of the Templars, where the involvement of women is not as absent as it might first appear. One of the central mysteries surrounding the Templars is their relationship with the Holy Grail. The Grail, often associated with Christ's bloodline and considered a symbol of divine power, has long been linked with the Order. Many alternative theories suggest that the Templars were not simply tasked with guarding the Grail, but were actively involved in uncovering its secrets and perhaps even protecting the lineage of Christ himself. It is in this context that the role of women within the Order takes on a more significant meaning. The Grail, as a symbol of both sacred feminine and divine bloodlines, may have been something that women within the Order were particularly entrusted with. Could it be that these women were not only the guardians of the Grail, but also the keepers of an ancient, hidden lineage, one that was passed down through generations of powerful women linked to the Templars? While the official Templar Order excluded women from becoming full knights, there were certainly ways in which women could have been involved in other aspects of the Order's work, especially in roles that were kept secret from the public eye. These women may have been spiritual advisors, visionaries, or even protectors of the Order's greatest mysteries. The idea that there were female Templars who played key roles behind the scenes is supported by several historical accounts and theories that suggest a hidden, matriarchal aspect to the Order structure. This aspect was not immediately apparent to outsiders, and its existence may have been deliberately concealed to maintain the Order's power and secrecy. It is crucial to examine the role of noblewomen in medieval Europe, many of whom were closely connected to the Templar Order. In an age when power was often tied to family lineage and marriage, women in noble families could hold considerable influence. The Templars were known to have received substantial donations from wealthy patrons, many of whom were noblewomen. These women, often widows or daughters of influential families, were not mere bystanders in the Templar network but active participants. They may have been the ones who helped sustain the Order, funding its operations, and ensuring its survival during times of crisis. Their contributions were often recorded in the annals of Templar history, but the full extent of their influence remains largely unknown. In some cases, these women may have had direct involvement in the spiritual and mystical practices of the Templars. Medieval Europe was a time when the sacred and the mystical were deeply intertwined, and many women were drawn to mystical traditions that explored the esoteric and hidden aspects of Christianity. The Templars, with their focus on secrecy, mysticism, and sacred knowledge, would have been fertile ground for such women to practice and even lead these traditions. Women with knowledge of the divine feminine, sacred geometry, and alchemical symbols may have been integral to the Templars' esoteric teachings. Some of these women may have been part of a network of mystics who passed down hidden knowledge through ritual and oral tradition. The historical records that do exist offer tantalizing glimpses of these women. One such example is the story of the Templar sisters, a group of women who were closely linked with the order but did not hold official membership. These women, often from noble families, may have served as spiritual guides or advisors to the male knights. Some believe that the Templars had an underground society of women who were responsible for safeguarding sacred texts, healing knowledge, or even guarding sacred relics like the Grail. These women were likely tied to the male knights through a network of secret rituals, oaths, and alliances. In some of the most speculative and controversial theories, it is suggested that these women were part of a hidden line of descent that traced back to the ancient bloodline of Christ. The idea that the Templars were protecting not only physical wealth and power, but also the secret of Christ's true heirs, is one of the most enduring myths surrounding the order. In these theories, the women of the Templar Order may have been the direct descendants or spiritual protectors of this bloodline. They were entrusted with the sacred task of keeping the secret hidden from the world at large, protecting it from those who would seek to exploit or destroy it. While much of this remains speculative, there are intriguing historical artifacts and accounts that suggest women played an important, though concealed, role in the Templar Order. For example, some of the Templars' most sacred symbols and icons, such as the rose or the moon, have long been associated with feminine energy and the divine feminine. These symbols could be seen as evidence of the Templars' reverence for women and the mystical power they held. The idea of the Templars' deep connection to the divine feminine is not new and has been explored by several modern historians and theorists, suggesting that women were not only tolerated within the order, but were seen as integral to its spiritual and esoteric practices. Moreover, the Templars' connection to the Knights Hospitaller, another medieval religious military order, may have further reinforced the presence of women in the Templar world. The Hospitallers, unlike the Templars, had female members who served in their hospitals and supported the order's mission. It is likely that the Templars, who were closely allied with the Hospitallers, also had informal ties to women who played critical roles in their spiritual and charitable endeavors. These women may have served as healers, caregivers, and spiritual leaders, working behind the scenes to support the order's mission. The concept of the hidden daughters of the Templars challenges the traditional understanding of the order. It suggests that the male knights were not the sole bearers of the order's secrets and legacies. Instead, women, operating in the background or within secret networks, may have been key to preserving and protecting the Templars' most sacred and mystical knowledge. The hidden daughters of the Templars were not just figures of passive support, but active participants in the maintenance and transmission of the order's esoteric wisdom. As we continue to uncover the layers of history, it becomes clearer that the Templars were far more complex than we once thought. Their connections to powerful women, both within and outside the order, hint at a deeper and more profound understanding of the mysteries they sought to protect. The hidden daughters of the Templars may have held the key to the secrets of the Grail, the lost knowledge of ancient civilizations, and the true spiritual path that the Templars followed. The Knights Templar have long been surrounded by an aura of mystery, secrecy, and intrigue, a reputation that has only grown over the centuries. Their activities, shrouded in shadow, seem to have transcended the ordinary, with many believing that the Templars were involved in practices far more esoteric than the general public ever understood. What is often overlooked in these narratives, however, is the possibility that women played an instrumental role in the mystical and ritualistic elements of the order. While the mainstream story of the Templars has always centered around their martial prowess and religious fervor, the lesser-known aspects of their spiritual practices, their secret knowledge, their connections to the divine, and their hidden rituals may have been influenced by women in ways that remain largely unacknowledged. The Templars' religious life, intertwined with their military activities, was steeped in secrecy. Their rituals, which were deeply rooted in mysticism and hidden knowledge, were designed to protect the sacred teachings and artifacts they guarded, most notably the Holy Grail. These rituals, believed by some to be steeped in ancient traditions passed down through the ages, were not simply prayers and ceremonies, but complex acts that involved the invocation of divine power, secret symbols, and mystical rites. The influence of women in such rituals may have been far greater than historians have traditionally acknowledged. And this secret feminine aspect could have been essential to the Templars' understanding of the spiritual and the divine. To fully appreciate the role of women in Templar rituals, one must understand the nature of the Templars' mysticism and the cultural and religious environment in which they operated. The order was not merely a military group, but also a brotherhood engaged in the pursuit of hidden knowledge, often linked to the sacred and the mystical. The Templars were believed to possess a deep understanding of esoteric Christian teachings, as well as ancient knowledge that was thought to predate Christianity itself. They were connected, by some accounts, to ancient mystery schools, alchemical traditions, and occult practices that were far outside the bounds of mainstream Christian doctrine. Many of these traditions, especially those tied to the mysteries of the divine feminine and sacred sexuality, were rooted in pre-Christian spiritual practices, which often gave women a central role in the rites. Women, throughout history, have been associated with the sacred feminine, an archetype of divine energy that embodies creation, fertility, and spiritual enlightenment. In many ancient religious traditions, women were the keepers of sacred knowledge, from the priestesses of ancient Egypt to the oracles of Delphi in Greece. In these traditions, women were not just passive participants, but active agents of spiritual power, entrusted with wisdom that was considered too profound for men to access. This idea of the divine feminine, which represents a balance between intellect and intuition, has been integral to many mystical and religious systems throughout history. It is this concept that may have found a place within the Templar order, albeit one that was carefully concealed from public view. One of the key aspects of Templar mysticism was its connection to the concept of the Grail. The Holy Grail has been associated with the sacred bloodline of Christ and with the divine feminine, with many legends suggesting that the Grail was not just a physical vessel, but a symbol of a profound spiritual mystery. The Grail, in this context, is seen as a vehicle for divine knowledge, capable of providing access to wisdom that transcends ordinary understanding. The role of women in Templar rituals, particularly those surrounding the Grail, could have been more than symbolic. They may have served as active participants in rituals designed to unlock its mysteries. Their connection to the divine feminine, in particular, would have made them ideal conduits for accessing the Grail's hidden powers. The Templars were known to be deeply involved in alchemy, a mystical and esoteric science that sought to understand the nature of the universe, the transformation of matter, and the pursuit of spiritual enlightenment. Alchemy, often linked to both the material and spiritual realms, has a long history of feminine associations. In many alchemical traditions, the alchemist's work was believed to involve both male and female principles, with the idea that spiritual transformation required a union of opposites, the masculine and the feminine. The Templars' engagement with alchemy may have included rituals that called upon these feminine energies, drawing on the symbolism of the goddess and the feminine mysteries to facilitate their work. It is possible that women were not only involved in these rituals, but were also the ones who held the keys to understanding the deeper, more hidden aspects of alchemical practice. The presence of women in Templar rituals could also be connected to the role of female mystics in medieval Europe. Many women in the Middle Ages were drawn to mystical and religious practices that focused on direct communion with the divine. Women such as Hildegard of Bingen, who was both a visionary and a scholar, and others like her, embodied a form of spiritual power that was recognized by the Church, but simultaneously marginalized by mainstream society. These women, while often excluded from the formal religious structures, maintained a deep connection to the sacred, and their visions were considered to be divinely inspired. It is conceivable that some of these women may have been linked to the Templars, whether through shared spiritual practices or by being sought out as spiritual advisors to the order. In Templar mysticism, the divine feminine was not merely a passive force, but transformative power that was capable of unlocking the deepest secrets of the universe. This belief could have extended to Templar rituals, where women played an active role in shaping the spiritual practices of the order. These rituals, focused on divine knowledge and the Grail, may have been seen as a way to access hidden wisdom, and women may have been the gatekeepers of this knowledge. The use of symbols such as the rose, the moon, and the chalice, all associated with the feminine in various cultures, was central to the Templars' mystical teachings. These symbols, often concealed within the architecture and iconography of Templar sites, may have been part of a hidden code, one that only a select few, perhaps including women, could truly understand. The idea of women being involved in these mystical rites is further supported by the Templars' connections to the Cathars, a Christian sect that was known for its dualistic beliefs and reverence for the feminine. The Cathars viewed the material world as inherently corrupt and believed that spiritual enlightenment came from transcending the physical realm. They also held a deep reverence for women, viewing them as the bearers of spiritual wisdom and the keepers of the divine feminine. Given the Templars' known interest in the Cathar movement, it is plausible that they shared similar beliefs and practices, particularly regarding the spiritual power of women. The Templars' interactions with the Cathars, especially in the region of Languedoc, could have been a key moment in the development of the Templars' own mystical and spiritual practices, which may have involved women in crucial roles. Despite the male-dominated nature of the order's official structure, these esoteric practices suggest that women may have held a central, though hidden, position in Templar rituals. The women involved in these rituals were likely not just passive observers, but active participants who were integral to the spiritual and mystical workings of the order. Their role in the Templars' pursuit of hidden knowledge and their connection to the sacred feminine could have been the key to unlocking the order's deepest secrets, including those tied to the Grail and the ancient wisdom they guarded. As we delve deeper into the hidden history of the Templars, it becomes clear that the mysticism of the order was far more complex than we have been led to believe. The involvement of women in the order's rituals and spiritual practices may have been a crucial element in their quest for enlightenment, power, and hidden knowledge. These women, operating in the shadows of history, were not mere supporters of the Templars. They were spiritual leaders, mystics, and guardians of secrets that have been kept hidden for centuries. The concept of the divine feminine has been central to spiritual traditions across time and space. In many ancient cultures, the feminine was revered not just for its life-giving and nurturing qualities, but also as a potent force of transformation, wisdom, and divine power. From the goddess archetypes of ancient Egypt, Greece, and Mesopotamia, to the Virgin Mary in Christian mysticism, the feminine has long held a place of sacred reverence. Within the world of the Knights Templar, however, the divine feminine remains an aspect that has been largely obscured from history. Yet, buried within the rituals, symbols, and spiritual teachings of the Templars, there lies a hidden legacy, a connection to the divine feminine that may have been pivotal to the order's mystical pursuits and sacred mission. Unveiling this hidden aspect of the Templar legacy reveals a deeper understanding of their secret knowledge and the profound role women played in their mystical and esoteric practices. While the mainstream narrative of the Templars focuses on their military prowess, wealth, and religious zeal, there's a far more subtle and hidden history that points to the Templars' deep connection to ancient spiritual traditions that celebrated the feminine as a powerful and essential force in the cosmos. The Templars, much like other secret societies throughout history, were not just interested in warfare or politics. They were also engaged in the preservation and transmission of ancient, hidden knowledge. This knowledge, often connected to alchemy, sacred geometry, and mysticism, was imbued with a deep reverence for the divine feminine, which was perceived as a key to accessing higher levels of spiritual wisdom. One of the most telling aspects of the Templar connection to the divine feminine is the symbolism embedded in their rituals and architecture. The Templars, known for their meticulous attention to detail in the construction of their castles, churches, and chapels, often employed symbolic motifs that pointed to the feminine. Among these, the rose, the moon, and the chalice were prominent symbols that resonated with ancient feminine archetypes. The rose, for example, was associated with the goddess Venus in Roman mythology and with Mary Magdalene in Christian mysticism. It represented beauty, love, and the sacred union of opposites, principles that were deeply connected to the divine feminine. Similarly, the moon, often depicted in Templar art and iconography, has long been associated with the feminine principle, symbolizing intuition, cyclic renewal, and the mysteries of the night. The chalice, too, particularly when linked to the Grail, carries profound feminine associations, representing the womb and the vessel of divine receptivity. These symbols were not arbitrary. They were carefully chosen by the Templars, encoded into their sacred spaces, and designed to convey hidden spiritual truths. Yet, the true significance of these symbols has often been overlooked, particularly the feminine aspect. Mainstream historical narratives often ignore or downplay the connections between the Templars and the sacred feminine, focusing instead on their military conquests and financial dealings. However, to understand the Templars in their full complexity, it is crucial to recognize that their mystical and spiritual pursuits were deeply intertwined with the idea of the divine feminine. The association between the Templars and the divine feminine can also be seen in the Order's connection to the Holy Grail, a symbol that has captivated imaginations for centuries. In many Grail legends, the Grail is not just a physical object, but a powerful, mystical vessel that represents the union of the divine masculine and feminine. It is believed by some that the Grail, often associated with the bloodline of Christ, holds within it the secrets of spiritual enlightenment and immortality. The Grail, in this context, is a symbol of divine wisdom, one that can only be fully understood when approached with both masculine and feminine perspectives. This idea of balance and union is essential to understanding the Templars' connection to the Grail, and it suggests that the role of women in the Templar Order was not just peripheral, but perhaps integral to the Grail's mystery. The Templars' association with the Grail was not merely a matter of guarding an artifact. It was about protecting the esoteric knowledge and spiritual wisdom that the Grail represented. In this sense, the Grail was more than just a vessel. It was a symbol of the sacred feminine, of spiritual rebirth and transformation. Some believe that the Templars were not simply protectors of the Grail, but also seekers of its hidden meaning, understanding that the Grail's power could only be unlocked by those who understood the deeper, feminine aspects of spiritual knowledge. This hidden legacy of the divine feminine within the Templar Order could explain their secretive nature and the esoteric practices they engaged in. To fully understand the Templars' connection to the divine feminine, we must also consider their ties to the ancient mysteries that predate Christianity. In ancient cultures, the feminine was often seen as a source of hidden wisdom and spiritual power. The priestesses of ancient Egypt, for example, were revered as custodians of sacred knowledge and were believed to have access to the divine realms. Similarly, in the mystery schools of Greece and Rome, women were often seen as the key to understanding the deeper mysteries of existence. These ancient traditions celebrated the goddess and the sacred feminine, recognizing that the feminine principle was essential to the balance of the universe. It is possible that the Templars, with their deep interest in mystical traditions and hidden knowledge, were influenced by these ancient systems of thought. The Templars were known to have traveled throughout Europe and the Holy Land, encountering various religious and spiritual traditions along the way. Some scholars believe that the Templars were exposed to the mysteries of the ancient world, including those that celebrated the goddess and the divine feminine. This exposure may have had a profound impact on the Order's spiritual practices, leading them to incorporate the feminine into their own esoteric teachings. Furthermore, the idea of the sacred feminine was not exclusive to pagan or pre-Christian traditions. In Christian mysticism, the feminine has been celebrated in the form of the Virgin Mary, who embodies purity, compassion, and divine grace. Mary Magdalene, too, is often seen as a symbol of the sacred feminine, representing both the earthly and spiritual aspects of the divine. The Templars, as a Christian order, may have recognized these feminine symbols and incorporated them into their own rituals and beliefs. In this way, the divine feminine, as represented by figures like Mary and Magdalene, could have served as a key source of inspiration for the Templars' spiritual practices. The suppression of the divine feminine in history is a recurring theme, and the Templars may have been one of the few organizations to continue to honor and incorporate these aspects into their esoteric teachings. The Church, with its patriarchal structure, often sought to minimize the feminine in its theology and practices. However, the Templars' secret rituals, which were largely hidden from the public eye, allowed them to maintain a connection to the divine feminine, an aspect of spirituality that was suppressed in mainstream religious institutions. This secret connection to the feminine could explain the Templars' enduring mystique and the myths that surround them to this day. As we delve deeper into the mysteries of the Templars, it becomes clear that their legacy is far more complex than we have been taught. The divine feminine, long relegated to the margins of history, was an essential part of their spiritual worldview. Whether through their connection to the Grail, their use of feminine symbols, or their engagement with ancient mystical traditions, the Templars were deeply connected to a hidden, feminine aspect of spirituality. This hidden legacy, which has been deliberately obscured, offers us a new way of understanding the Templars, not as mere warrior monks, but as seekers of divine wisdom, guardians of sacred knowledge, and protectors of the divine feminine. The Holy Grail is one of the most enduring symbols in the history of Christianity, often seen as a vessel of divine power, a relic of ultimate spiritual importance. For centuries, it has been depicted as the cup from which Jesus drank at the Last Supper, a sacred object believed to hold miraculous powers and the secret to eternal life. But beyond its widely accepted religious significance, there lies a deeper, more esoteric interpretation of the Grail, one that has long been associated with the divine feminine, with the concept of sacred bloodlines, and with the role of women in the Templar Order. To understand the Templars' secretive mission, one must explore the possibility that their true purpose was not only to protect the physical Grail, but to safeguard the hidden knowledge of a sacred lineage, one that was passed down through generations of women and guarded by the Order for centuries. The idea of the Grail as a symbol of sacred bloodline and divine inheritance has been explored in numerous alternative histories and theories. According to these interpretations, the Grail is not simply a physical object, but a metaphor for a line of descent that traces back to Christ himself. Some suggest that Jesus was married to Mary Magdalene and that their union produced a bloodline that has been secretly preserved and protected throughout history. This bloodline, considered by many to be of divine origin, holds within it the key to a deeper spiritual truth, the knowledge of Christ's true heirs. In this context, the Grail is not merely a cup, but a powerful symbol of Christ's legacy, a legacy that has been safeguarded by a select few through the ages. This hidden bloodline, central to the mystery of the Grail, brings us to the fascinating role of women in the Templar Order. While the mainstream understanding of the Templars focuses on their military endeavors, their wealth, and their devotion to Christian doctrine, a more complex story lies beneath the surface, one that involves the protection of a sacred legacy, a legacy that was passed down through women. If the Grail is indeed a symbol of Christ's bloodline, then women, particularly those connected to this bloodline, would have been integral to the Templars' sacred mission. The Order's role in preserving this bloodline, both spiritually and physically, may have been one of their most important and secretive tasks. Mary Magdalene, the woman often associated with the Grail, occupies a central role in this narrative. According to various alternative theories, she was not merely a follower of Jesus, but his wife and the mother of his children. This idea, while controversial, has been explored in numerous books and documentaries, many of which suggest that Mary Magdalene carried the bloodline of Christ, a lineage that was passed down through her descendants. If this theory is correct, then the Templars, with their deep ties to the Church and their secretive nature, could have been entrusted with protecting this sacred bloodline. The Order may have seen their role as guardians not just of the Grail as a physical object, but of the descendants of Jesus Christ himself, protecting them from those who might seek to destroy or exploit this knowledge. The role of women in preserving this bloodline would have been crucial. If the Grail indeed represents a lineage, then the women who carried that lineage, whether as descendants of Jesus and Mary Magdalene or as spiritual custodians of the Grail secrets, would have been central to the Templars' mission. The women who were closely associated with the order, either as patrons, spiritual advisors, or even secret members, may have been entrusted with guarding this knowledge. These women were not passive figures, but active participants in the protection of the Grail's hidden legacy. This idea is supported by various historical records and alternative theories that suggest the Templars had close ties to powerful women in medieval Europe. The order received significant donations and support from noble families, many of whom were women. These women, often widows or daughters of influential families, wielded considerable power and influence in their own right. It is conceivable that some of these women were more than mere benefactors. They may have been involved in the secret spiritual practices of the Templars, sharing in the guardianship of the Grail and its hidden meaning. The role of women in this context is not just one of passive support, but of active participation in the Order's most sacred and secretive mission. Furthermore, the idea of a hidden bloodline extends beyond the biblical narrative of Jesus and Mary Magdalene. Throughout history, the concept of sacred bloodlines has been central to various royal and noble families, many of whom believe their lineage to be of divine or royal origin. In the case of the Templars, the notion of a bloodline that must be protected takes on a more esoteric meaning. It suggests that the Templars were not merely guarding a physical object, but the secret of a divine inheritance that could have profound spiritual implications for humanity. This hidden legacy, passed down through women, may have been seen by the Templars as a key to unlocking the greater mysteries of the universe. The Templars' connection to the Grail, and by extension to the divine feminine, can also be seen in their secretive rituals and symbols. The Grail is often depicted as a chalice, a vessel that holds sacred blood. The idea of the chalice as a symbol of feminine power is not a new one. Throughout history, the chalice has been associated with the feminine principle, representing receptivity, nourishment, and the vessel of life. In many spiritual traditions, the feminine is seen as the vessel that receives and nurtures the divine. In the context of the Templars, the chalice may have symbolized more than just a cup. It may have represented the womb of creation, the divine feminine that holds the potential for spiritual rebirth and enlightenment. The Templars' connection to this sacred symbolism could explain why women were so integral to their mission. Women, as the physical and spiritual bearers of life, would have been seen as the perfect custodians of the Grail's hidden knowledge. Their connection to the sacred bloodline and their role as the vessels of life would have made them key figures in the Templars' spiritual hierarchy, even if their role was deliberately obscure by history. In a world where the patriarchal structures of the church and society often relegated women to the background, the Templars may have been one of the few organizations that recognized the essential role of women in preserving the sacred mysteries. The idea of the Templars as guardians of the sacred bloodline also suggests that their mission was not just about preserving the physical Grail, but about ensuring the survival of the bloodline and the spiritual knowledge it carried. This would explain why the Templars, after their dissolution in the early 14th century, continued to be the subject of intense speculation and intrigue. The Order's secretive nature, combined with its deep connection to the Grail and the divine feminine, has fueled countless theories about its true purpose and its hidden legacy. If the Templars were indeed protecting a bloodline that traces back to Jesus and Mary Magdalene, then their mission was far more profound and far-reaching than anyone could have imagined. The women associated with the Templars, whether as secret members, spiritual advisors, or guardians of the Grail's mysteries, were not just passive figures in the Order's story. They were active participants in a sacred mission, one that sought to preserve and protect the hidden bloodline of Christ, a lineage that could change the course of history. The Templars' true legacy, hidden from the world for centuries, may be the knowledge that the Grail is not just an object, but a symbol of divine inheritance, a symbol that was safeguarded by women throughout history. As the mysteries of the Templars continue to unfold, it is clear that the role of women in this story is not one of silence and invisibility, but one of profound significance, a role that may have been the key to unlocking the deeper secrets of the Templar Order. When we think about the wealth and power of the Knights Templar, Images of vast estates, grand castles, and untold treasures come to mind. The order, after all, became one of the wealthiest and most influential organizations in medieval Europe, with extensive holdings stretching from the Holy Land to the heart of France. But behind the public face of the Templar Order, its military prowess and its financial empire, there were also powerful, often hidden, alliances that contributed to its success. One of the most intriguing aspects of these alliances involves the women who were, in many ways, the unsung patrons of the Templars, women whose wealth, influence, and spiritual ties helped sustain the order and may have played a far more critical role in its mission than we have been led to believe. The Templars were not only sustained by the donations and support of kings, noblemen, and religious leaders, but also by powerful women. These women, often from the highest echelons of medieval society, played a crucial role in ensuring the Templars' financial stability and spiritual influence. Through their wealth, patronage, and spiritual guidance, they provided the order with resources and protection, enabling the Templars to pursue their sacred mission. Yet, the nature of their involvement was not merely financial. It was deeply spiritual, and many of these women were likely aligned with the Templars' hidden, esoteric teachings and sacred duties. The first thing to note about these women is that they were often nobility from families who possessed vast estates, land, and wealth. Nobility in medieval Europe was not just about title. It was about influence, connections, and the ability to shape the political and spiritual landscape. Women of noble birth had significant power, especially if they were widows or unmarried. In a time when power and land were closely tied to family lineage, many noble women had the ability to make decisions regarding the wealth and lands of their families. These women were not just passive figures in the Templars' rise to power. They were active participants, wielding influence in their own right. One of the most famous examples of female patron is the Countess of Champagne, Marguerite of Navarre, whose family was closely allied with the Templars. Marguerite's patronage of the order was not merely financial, it was also spiritual. She, like many other noblewomen of the time, would have had a deep connection to the mystical and religious undercurrents of the Templar order. Her support allowed the Templars to flourish, particularly in the region of Champagne, where they established some of their most important headquarters. These women were not merely supporters from a distance. They were intimately involved in the activities of the Templars, from providing resources to offering spiritual guidance and patronage. In many cases, these women were not just passive patrons, but active participants in the Templars' spiritual practices. It is important to remember that the Templars were more than just a military order. They were a religious brotherhood, committed to a deep and secretive spiritual mission. The Templars were involved in esoteric traditions, including alchemy, sacred geometry, and the mystical pursuit of hidden knowledge. It is likely that many of the women who supported the Templars were aware of, or even directly involved in, these spiritual practices. Their patronage was not just about land or treasure. It was also a means of supporting the hidden spiritual work of the Templars, aligning themselves with the esoteric traditions that the order sought to preserve and protect. A striking example of this is the relationship between the Templars and the women associated with the Cathar movement in southern France. The Cathars were a heretical Christian sect that was deeply suspicious of the Catholic Church and its hierarchy. They held a radically different view of Christianity, one that emphasized dualism, asceticism, and a direct connection to the divine. The Cathars also revered the divine feminine, seeing women as equal to men in spiritual matters and often placing women in positions of power within their communities. This focus on the feminine and the equality of men and women in spiritual matters resonated with many noble women in the region, who saw in the Cathars a reflection of their own spiritual authority. The Cathars, while persecuted by the church, found powerful allies in noble women who provided them with material support, often secretly, to help them survive in a world that sought to suppress their beliefs. Some historians suggest that the Templars, who were active in the same regions where the Cathars flourished, may have had ties to these women. The Templars themselves were suspected of harboring heretical beliefs, and their secretive nature Their interest in ancient knowledge and their connection to the Grail led some to believe that they were not merely military men, but also spiritual seekers, open to influences that aligned with their own esoteric agenda. Noblewomen who were sympathetic to the Cathars' beliefs may have provided financial and spiritual support to the Templars, believing that they shared common goals in protecting the ancient mysteries. Moreover, the idea of the sacred feminine, which was so central to the Cathars' beliefs, was also a major influence in the Templar world. The concept of the divine feminine, represented by symbols such as the rose, the moon, and the chalice, was woven throughout Templar rituals. It is possible that noblewomen, who were often the keepers of sacred family knowledge, were drawn to the Templars' mystical practices and saw them as a way to protect the ancient feminine wisdom that they had inherited through their own lineages. These women, many of whom were descended from powerful and ancient families, may have recognized in the Templars a shared understanding of the sacred mysteries, a connection that transcended gender and tradition. The support of these women, who were often highly educated, politically astute, and spiritually connected, gave the Templars a level of protection and influence that would have been difficult to achieve otherwise. Their patronage enabled the Templars to build their castles, expand their influence, and continue their sacred work. These women, while often hidden from the public eye, were critical to the survival of the order, providing not just material wealth, but also spiritual and intellectual resources that allowed the Templars to thrive. In some cases, these women may have even been initiates in the Templar order, though their involvement would have been kept secret due to the patriarchal nature of medieval society. Women who were aligned with the Templars' esoteric teachings may have been initiated into secret rites and rituals, participating in the deeper spiritual practices that were at the core of the order's mission. These rites, which were likely connected to the mysteries of the Grail, the divine feminine, and hidden knowledge, would have been an important part of the Templars' work. Women, as spiritual guides, protectors, and custodians of knowledge, would have played a key role in these rites, acting as intermediaries between the divine and the earthly realms. The connection between female patrons and the Templars goes beyond the realm of financial support. It speaks to the deep spiritual and mystical alliances that were formed during this time. These women, wielding significant power in their own right, understood the importance of the Templars' mission, not only in the material world, but also in the spiritual realm. Their patronage was an act of alliance, an agreement to protect and preserve the sacred mysteries of the divine feminine, and to safeguard the knowledge that had been passed down through generations. The Templars, in return, provided these women with spiritual protection, access to secret knowledge, and a means of aligning themselves with a higher divine purpose. As the centuries have passed, much of the role of these female patrons has been obscured, their names lost to history. Yet, through the fragments of history and the whispers of secret teachings, we can begin to see the true depth of their involvement. These women were not just patrons in the conventional sense. They were active participants in the spiritual and mystical endeavors of the Templars. Their role in the order was integral, and without their wealth, wisdom, and guidance, the Templars may not have been able to achieve the level of influence and power that they did. Throughout history, secret societies have always existed in the shadows, guarding esoteric knowledge, mystical rituals, and powerful legacies that are often hidden from the public eye. These societies, while largely male-dominated in their outward structures, have always maintained an undercurrent of secrecy, and often, women have been integral to their existence, both in overt and covert ways. The Knights Templar, despite being primarily known for their military prowess and religious zeal, were also part of a broader network of secret societies that operated in the shadows of medieval Europe. The Templars' engagement with these hidden networks goes beyond what is generally acknowledged by traditional historians. Among these networks, one of the most fascinating and enigmatic aspects involves the role of women. Women were not simply passive observers or supporters of these societies. In many cases, they were active custodians of secret knowledge, protectors of sacred traditions, and key figures in the Templar Order's most esoteric rituals and missions. While it is often assumed that the Templar Order was a strictly male organization, there is compelling evidence to suggest that women played a crucial role in the Order's secretive activities. The role of women within the Templars was not merely as wives or supporters of the male knights. Many women were integral to the very foundation of Templar mysticism, secret knowledge, and the preservation of ancient traditions. These women, who may have been initiated into the Templars' inner circles, were likely the custodians of hidden wisdom, the keepers of spiritual traditions that extended far beyond the public eye. To understand the full extent of their involvement, we must explore the broader context in which the Templars operated. The medieval world, particularly in the regions where the Templars were most active, was rife with secret societies, many of which were built around the preservation and transmission of ancient knowledge. Some of these societies were overt, such as the Gnostic and Hermetic traditions, while others were covert, operating in secret to protect esoteric wisdom that had been passed down through generations. These societies were not merely about politics or wealth. They were often concerned with spiritual enlightenment, the unlocking of higher knowledge, and the pursuit of hidden truths about the universe, humanity, and the divine. The Templars themselves were deeply involved in these networks of secret societies, particularly as they grew in power and influence. Their journey to the Holy Land, their involvement in the Crusades, and their exposure to various mystical traditions opened the door to a host of secret teachings that transcended traditional Christianity. As the Templars became more involved in these hidden networks, they encountered esoteric systems that were not only male-dominated, but also centered on the role of the divine feminine, the mystery of creation, and the spiritual potential of women. While male Templars may have been the public face of the order, the women who supported them, both as spiritual guides and as custodians of sacred knowledge, were the true protectors of the order's most profound mysteries. One of the most fascinating aspects of the Templars' involvement in these secret societies is their connection to the Cathars. The Cathars were a religious group in southern France who held beliefs that were considered heretical by the Catholic Church. Among their core teachings was the reverence for the divine feminine, a belief that women could attain equal spiritual status to men, and that the material world was inferior to the spiritual realm. The Cathars viewed women as spiritual equals, often elevating them to positions of authority within their communities. This focus on the sacred feminine likely resonated with the Templars, whose interest in the divine feminine and esoteric spiritual teachings was a hallmark of their mysticism. The Cathars were brutally persecuted by the Catholic Church during the Albigensian Crusade, but many believe that their teachings survived in secret, preserved by certain noble families and spiritual leaders. These teachings, particularly regarding the divine feminine and the importance of women in spiritual matters, may have influenced the Templars in ways that were not immediately visible to the outside world. Some scholars argue that the Templars, in their search for hidden knowledge, not only encountered Cathar teachings, but may have even protected certain Cathar women, allowing them to pass on their sacred knowledge and spiritual practices. These women, often considered by the Church to be dangerous heretics, may have been seen by the Templars as spiritual equals, custodians of wisdom that was too profound to be left in the hands of the Church. The Templars' connection to the Cathars was not the only link between secret societies and women. During this time, many esoteric societies and mystical orders, from the Rosicrucians to the alchemists, were built around the idea that women held a unique connection to divine knowledge. These societies were not just about the study of sacred texts or religious doctrine. They were about the direct experience of the divine, a concept that transcended the rigid structures of male-dominated religious institutions. Women, as the bearers of life and the embodiments of creation, were seen as possessing a unique spiritual insight that men could not fully access. In many of these societies, women were seen as spiritual guides, the keepers of knowledge, and the key to unlocking higher truths about the universe. The Templars, immersed in these secretive networks, would have certainly encountered women who were initiates of these esoteric traditions. These women may have been involved in the Templars' most sacred rituals, participating in spiritual practices that were deeply tied to the feminine aspect of divinity. These practices, often involving symbols such as the rose, the moon, and the chalice, were used to access hidden knowledge, unlock divine mysteries, and connect with the higher realms. The Templars, who were known for their interest in mysticism and the occult, would have likely recognized the power of these women and included them in their most secretive activities. What is particularly intriguing about the role of women in these secret societies is their connection to the preservation of ancient knowledge. In many cultures, women were seen as the keepers of sacred traditions, the transmitters of spiritual wisdom that had been passed down through generations. The role of women as protectors of secret knowledge was especially prominent in cultures where patriarchal structures had attempted to suppress the feminine aspect of spirituality. In these societies, women held the keys to unlocking the deeper, more hidden mysteries of existence, knowledge that was often deemed too dangerous for the general population. The Templars, who were constantly seeking knowledge that lay beyond the reach of ordinary people, may have seen women as vital partners in this quest. These women, as custodians of secret knowledge, were not just passive participants. They were active agents in the preservation of the Templars' hidden teachings. They were the ones who carried the torch of ancient wisdom, passed down from one generation to the next, often in secret. Their role in the Templar Order, if we are to believe alternative histories and theories, was to safeguard the Order's most esoteric knowledge that may have included the true nature of the Holy Grail, the secret bloodlines, and the ancient mysteries of the divine feminine. These women, whether initiated into the Order or acting as spiritual advisors, were the unsung heroines of the Templars' most sacred mission. The role of women within the secret networks of the Templars was not confined to the past. As the Order's influence waned and the Inquisition moved to suppress their power, these hidden women, the protectors of sacred knowledge, likely retreated into the shadows, carrying with them the ancient wisdom that had been entrusted to them. But the legacy of their involvement with the Templars did not vanish. Their stories, though obscured by time and political agendas, remain intertwined with the mysteries of the Order. Today, as we continue to explore the hidden history of the Templars, we begin to uncover the profound and lasting influence that these women had on the Order's mission, its mysticism, and its enduring legacy. The tragic end of a Knights Templar is one of the most dramatic and controversial moments in medieval history. In 1307, under orders from King Philip IV of France, the Templars were violently arrested, tortured, and disbanded, their assets seized by the crown, and their leaders, including the Grand Master Jacques de Molay, executed in public spectacles meant to send a message to all who might challenge the authority of the Church and the monarchy. This brutal suppression of the Templars, however, was not merely a political maneuver or a reaction to the Templars' wealth and power. It was also a concerted effort to extinguish the Templars' most esoteric teachings, the very knowledge that they had guarded for centuries. At the heart of this purge was the deliberate suppression of the sacred feminine, a force that had played an integral role in the Templars' spiritual practices and the hidden knowledge they had preserved. For centuries, the Church had held a firm grip on spiritual authority in Europe, and anything that threatened its monopoly on religious and spiritual teachings was met with suspicion, repression, and even violence. The Templars, who had gained immense power and influence in both the military and financial realms, were increasingly viewed as a threat by both the Church and the monarchy. Their secretive nature, their wealth, and their involvement in mystical practices, particularly those that honored the divine feminine, made them vulnerable to attacks from those in power. At the core of the Templars' spiritual practices was a deep reverence for the feminine aspect of the divine, a tradition that had existed in various forms across ancient cultures and was still present in the esoteric systems that the Templars sought to preserve. This feminine principle was symbolized in many of the Templars' rituals and teachings, from the worship of the Virgin Mary to the veneration of symbols like the rose, the chalice, and the moon. These symbols were not only revered for their connection to Christ and Christianity, but also for their deeper, hidden meanings that connected to a long-forgotten tradition of honoring the goddess, the divine feminine, and the mysteries of creation. The Catholic Church, with its patriarchal structure and its control over religious doctrine, viewed these feminine symbols and teachings as heretical. The notion that the divine could manifest in feminine form, that women could hold equal spiritual power as men, was seen as a direct challenge to the Church's authority. In this context, the Templars' reverence for the feminine was something that needed to be erased. It was not just a matter of dismantling a military order. It was about obliterating an ancient system of belief that threatened the foundational principles of the Church. The purge of the Templars was, therefore, not merely an attack on the physical power and wealth of the order, but an effort to eliminate the Templars' connection to a hidden, ancient spiritual tradition that venerated the feminine. The trial of the Templars, conducted by the Inquisition, was an attempt to force confessions from the knights, many of whom were tortured and coerced into admitting to crimes that were often fabricated. Among the charges brought against the Templars were accusations of heresy, blasphemy, and idolatry. These accusations, however, were not based on any concrete evidence of actual wrongdoing, but were instead designed to discredit the Templars and destroy their spiritual practices. The ultimate goal was to root out any traces of the sacred feminine teachings that the Templars had preserved. The role of women in this oppression cannot be overstated. Women, particularly those who were spiritually aligned with the Templars or who held positions of power in the church or nobility, would have been among those most threatened by the purge. The repression of the sacred feminine was not just a male-dominated effort. It involved women who were complicit in the patriarchal system that sought to suppress alternative spiritualities. Women who had aligned themselves with the Templars' teachings, whether as patrons, initiates, or spiritual advisors, would have been among those most targeted by the Inquisition. Their involvement in the Templars' mystical practices and their connection to the divine feminine would have made them prime candidates for persecution. But the suppression of the sacred feminine did not end with the destruction of the Templars. The Templar purge was part of a larger pattern of repression that spanned centuries. The divine feminine, which had once been honored in the ancient world through goddess worship and spiritual traditions that revered women, was gradually erased from the public consciousness. In its place, a patriarchal model of spirituality took hold, one that elevated masculine authority and marginalized feminine power. This suppression can be seen in the way the Church, over time, systematically eliminated female religious leaders, reduced the role of women in spiritual practices, and relegated the feminine to the realm of the material rather than the divine. The legacy of the Templars, however, would not be so easily eradicated. Despite the purge, the teachings of the order and the feminine wisdom they sought to protect continued to influence secret societies, esoteric movements, and mystical traditions throughout history. In the centuries following the dissolution of the Templars, their sacred knowledge did not disappear. It was simply hidden from the public eye, passed down in secret through other organizations. The Freemasons, the Rosicrucians, and other mystical societies that flourished in the centuries following the Templar purge were, in many ways, continuations of the Templar legacy, preserving many of the same teachings and symbols that honored the divine feminine. Women, though often excluded from the overt leadership of these societies, continue to play a crucial role in the transmission of these hidden teachings. Their spiritual power, though suppressed by the mainstream institutions of the time, remained a vital force in the preservation of the sacred mysteries. One of the most enduring aspects of this oppression is the way it has shaped the modern world. The feminist movements of the 19th and 20th centuries, which sought to reclaim the power and influence of women in the spiritual and public spheres, can be seen as a reaction to the long history of the suppression of the sacred feminine. In the process of reclaiming their spiritual power, women have sought to rediscover the ancient traditions that the Templars and other secret societies once guarded. This movement, often intertwined with New Age spiritualities and esoteric practices, has sought to bring the divine feminine back into the collective consciousness, recognizing its importance not only for women, but for all of humanity. The continuing interest in the Templars, their mysteries, and their connection to the sacred feminine reflects a desire to reconnect with these lost teachings. Whether through the study of Templar history, the exploration of the Holy Grail, or the rediscovery of ancient goddess worship, there's a growing recognition that the suppression of the feminine was a significant loss for humanity, one that has left a spiritual void that many are eager to fill. The Templars' hidden knowledge, which was once suppressed and erased, is now being re-examined and reclaimed by those who seek to restore balance to the world's spiritual understanding. While the suppression of the sacred feminine may have been effective in extinguishing many of the Templars' teachings for a time, it cannot erase the enduring power of these ideas. The feminine, both in its spiritual and symbolic forms, continues to rise from the ashes of oppression, and the Templar legacy remains a vital part of this ongoing journey. The forces that sought to eliminate the divine feminine in medieval Europe may have succeeded for a time, but the truth cannot be hidden forever. The legacy of the Templars, the feminine wisdom they preserved, and the secret teachings they safeguarded are slowly coming to light once again. And in doing so, they are reshaping our understanding of history, spirituality, and the divine. The Knights Templar are often remembered as a military order, warriors bound by their vows of chastity, poverty, and obedience, marching under the banner of Christianity in the Crusades. But beneath this image lies a far more enigmatic story, one that involves the preservation of knowledge that, to this day, remains largely hidden or misunderstood. While the public narrative often centers on the Templars' military exploits and their eventual downfall, there is a rich and mysterious undercurrent to their existence, rooted in their pursuit of forbidden knowledge, secret teachings, and hidden symbols that have fascinated historians, occultists, and conspiracy theorists alike. The Templars were not only warriors, but also protectors of secrets, ancient truths that transcended conventional religious doctrines and ventured into realms of esoteric wisdom. This knowledge, which ranged from mystical and spiritual teachings to arcane sciences, was embedded in the order's practices, their symbols, and, perhaps most intriguing of all, in the cryptic codes they used to communicate and safeguard their most sacred beliefs. The concept of lost knowledge has always been a theme of great allure, and for the Templars, it was not just knowledge in the form of written manuscripts, but a living, breathing tradition passed down through secretive rituals, guarded by an elite inner circle. One of the most captivating aspects of Templar mysticism is the use of symbols. These symbols were not mere emblems of military strength or religious devotion. They were powerful conduits to higher knowledge. To the Templars, symbols had profound esoteric meanings, representing hidden truths about the divine, the cosmos, and human existence. Among the most well-known Templar symbols are the Red Cross, the Knight's Sword, and the Lamb, but there are countless other images and patterns that reveal the deeper layers of their spiritual worldview. These symbols were often encoded in art, architecture, and ritual, but their true significance was concealed from all but a select few. At the heart of this symbolic language was the idea of hidden knowledge, the belief that the divine and the mystical could not be fully understood by the uninitiated. This knowledge was reserved for those who had proven themselves worthy through initiation and spiritual discipline. In the Templars' case, their secret knowledge was not just about military strategy or wealth, but was centered on a profound spiritual wisdom that had its roots in ancient traditions. These teachings often aligned with the concepts of Gnosticism, Hermeticism, and other esoteric schools of thought that have been suppressed by the mainstream Christian church. It is said that the Templars' exposure to these hidden teachings occurred during their time in the Holy Land, where they came into contact with the remnants of ancient wisdom that had long been buried by the Roman Empire and the early church. This knowledge, according to some theories, was not only about religious doctrine, but also about the sacred geometry of the universe, alchemical processes, and the mysteries of creation itself. One of the most famous examples of this lost knowledge is the idea of the Holy Grail. While the Grail is commonly thought of as the chalice used by Jesus at the Last Supper, the Templars may have believed it symbolized something far deeper, an ancient lineage or a hidden truth that transcended the physical object. According to various alternative theories, the Templars did not just protect the Grail as a physical artifact. They safeguarded the knowledge it represented, a spiritual and bloodline connection to the divine. This hidden truth, passed down through the ages, could have held the key to unlocking deeper secrets about humanity's origins, purpose, and connection to the cosmos. The Templars' role in guarding this knowledge is further compounded by their alleged connection to sacred texts and ancient manuscripts, many of which have been lost to history. The discovery of the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, the Book of Enoch, and other early Christian and Gnostic texts in recent years has reignited interest in the idea that the Templars were not only custodians of the Grail, but also of forbidden books that contain knowledge considered heretical by the Catholic Church. These texts, which often presented alternative views of Christianity and its origins, were said to have been hidden by the early Church to suppress views that might challenge its authority. The Templars, through their connections to various religious and philosophical traditions, may have been instrumental in preserving these ancient writings, keeping them safe from those who sought to destroy them. The most intriguing of these writings might be those connected to the lost books of the Bible, including the Gospel of Thomas and other apocryphal texts that detail the teachings of Jesus from an entirely different perspective than the canonical Gospels. These texts suggest that early Christianity was not a monolithic belief system, but a diverse and dynamic tradition, with many competing ideas about the nature of God, Christ, and salvation. The Templars, it is speculated, were not just warriors in the service of the Church, but also spiritual seekers, engaged in a quest to uncover these hidden truths and preserve them for future generations. But how did these teachings and symbols manifest in the Templars' rituals? The answer lies in the structure and nature of the order itself. The Templars were organized into a hierarchical system, with a strict separation between the outer, public-facing order and the inner, secretive circle of initiates. Only those who had ascended to the highest ranks of the order were privy to its most sacred teachings and rituals. These secret rites, many of which remain shrouded in mystery, are thought to have involved intricate ceremonies that invoked divine forces, examined sacred geometry, and meditated on the cosmic order. Some researchers believe that the Templars' initiation rites included elements of Gnostic baptism, alchemical processes, and even astrological practices that sought to align the initiates with higher spiritual realms. The physical space in which these rituals were conducted also played an important role in the transmission of Templar knowledge. The Templars' commanderies and chapels, often built in remote or strategic locations, were designed with a specific architectural layout that encoded esoteric wisdom. The layout of many Templar structures, such as the famous Temple Church in London, is said to reflect the sacred geometry of the cosmos, incorporating elements of the ancient mystery schools and the lost knowledge of the ages. These buildings were not just places of worship. They were physical representations of the Templars' spiritual beliefs, incorporating symbols and designs that connected the material world to the divine. The Templars' connection to sacred geometry and the mysteries of the universe is one of the most captivating aspects of their legacy. This knowledge was not confined to religious rituals, but extended to their understanding of the natural world. The Templars were highly skilled in the art of architecture and construction, and many of the structures they built, including castles, churches, and fortresses, incorporated precise mathematical principles that reflected the harmony of the universe. It is said that the Templars believed that understanding the sacred geometry of the universe was a key to unlocking divine knowledge and understanding the true nature of God's creation. This knowledge, passed down from ancient civilizations such as the Egyptians, was seen as a way to connect with the divine order of the cosmos. The use of these symbols and codes by the Templars was not just for protection or concealment. They were tools of spiritual transformation. The belief was that by aligning oneself with these divine symbols and teachings, an initiate could achieve a higher level of spiritual enlightenment and a closer connection to the divine. For the Templars, the true meaning of their secret knowledge was not just intellectual, but deeply experiential, an understanding that could only be grasped through mystical experience and spiritual awakening. As the Templar order was suppressed and disbanded in the early 14th century, much of this knowledge was driven underground, hidden away in secret societies, religious movements, and mystical traditions. The symbols, codes, and sacred teachings that had once been preserved by the Templars were kept alive in the shadows, passed down through the centuries by those who understood their importance. The legacy of the Templars, therefore, extends far beyond their military exploits and their financial influence. It is a legacy that connects us to a deeper, hidden history, a history of lost knowledge, secret teachings, and divine wisdom that continues to captivate and intrigue to this day. The Knights Templar, once a powerful and influential organization, left behind a legacy that continues to resonate through history, long after their official dissolution. The end of the Templars in the early 14th century, with the arrest and execution of their leaders under King Philip IV of France, may have seemed like a definitive conclusion to their existence. However, the truth is far more complex. The Templars, though officially disbanded, did not simply disappear. Their influence has endured through centuries, woven into the fabric of various secret societies, political movements, and religious orders. Their legacy is not just one of wealth, power, or military conquest. It is also a legacy of hidden knowledge, sacred symbols, and spiritual wisdom that continues to captivate and intrigue. To understand the enduring legacy of the Templars, one must first consider the forces that tried to erase them. The purge of the Templars in 1307 was not merely a political maneuver. It was an attempt to destroy what the order represented, a powerful alternative to the religious and political status quo. The Templars' unique blend of military prowess, spiritual practices, and secret knowledge made them a threat to both the Catholic Church and secular rulers, particularly King Philip IV of France, who coveted their wealth and influence. The charges brought against the Templars, ranging from heresy to blasphemy, were largely fabricated, but they served their purpose: to dismantle the order and eliminate its power. However, what the Church and the monarchy failed to do was eradicate the Templars' teachings. These teachings, centered on the mysteries of the divine, the sacred feminine, and hidden spiritual knowledge, could not be so easily destroyed. In the centuries following the Templars' dissolution, their teachings and symbols were preserved in secret. Many of the knights who survived the purge were forced into hiding, but they did not abandon the sacred knowledge they had sworn to protect. Instead, this knowledge found a new home within other organizations, most notably the Freemasons. The Freemasons, with their intricate rituals, cryptic symbols, and hierarchical structure, became the inheritors of much of the Templar legacy. While the exact nature of the Templar-Freemason connection is debated, there is compelling evidence that many of the symbols and practices used by the Freemasons were directly influenced by the Templars. The idea of secret societies preserving forbidden knowledge is not new, and it is often assumed that the Templars passed on their esoteric teachings to organizations like the Freemasons, the Rosicrucians, and other mystical and occult groups. These groups, while outwardly focusing on different aims, such as charity, architecture, or alchemy, were often united by a common thread: the desire to protect and transmit knowledge that was suppressed by mainstream religious and political institutions. Many of the symbols used by these groups, such as the all-seeing eye, the compass, and the square, are thought to have their origins in Templar iconography. The idea of a lost or hidden knowledge, passed down through generations in secret, has become a central theme in the lore surrounding these organizations. The Templars' connection to secret societies extends beyond the Freemasons. Another group that has been linked to the Templars is the Rosicrucians, a mystical order that emerged in the early 17th century. The Rosicrucians, like the Templars, were steeped in esoteric traditions, including alchemy, Gnosticism, and the veneration of the divine feminine. The idea that the Rosicrucians inherited the Templars' knowledge is supported by their shared symbols and teachings, particularly their focus on spiritual enlightenment and the quest for hidden wisdom. The Rosicrucians, much like the Templars, believe in the existence of secret knowledge that could lead to personal transformation and a deeper understanding of the universe. They too were accused of heresy and subversion by the Church, and their teachings were often veiled in allegory and symbolism to protect them from persecution. In addition to secret societies, The Templars' legacy can also be traced in the history of art, literature, and architecture. Many of the Templars' most famous structures, such as their castles, churches, and chapels, were designed with sacred geometry and symbolism in mind. These buildings were not just functional spaces. They were expressions of the Templars' deeper spiritual beliefs. The layout of many Templar structures is thought to encode hidden knowledge, such as the proportions of the human body, the divine order of the cosmos, and the mysteries of the universe. These buildings, some of which still stand today, continue to captivate visitors and historians alike, as their design and construction speak to a deeper, hidden understanding of the world. The Templars' influence on art and literature is also significant. Throughout history, their story has been told and retold in books, films, and works of fiction. From the tales of the Grail legends to modern conspiracy theories, the Templars have become symbols of mystery and intrigue. The notion of a secret brotherhood protecting ancient knowledge has inspired countless works of fiction, from medieval romances to Dan Brown's best-selling novels. In many of these stories, the Templars are depicted as guardians of a powerful secret, whether it is the Holy Grail, the lost knowledge of the ancients, or a hidden truth about the nature of the divine. These depictions, though often fictionalized, reflect the enduring fascination with the Templars and their role in preserving forbidden knowledge. The Templars' legacy is also felt in the ongoing search for lost treasures and artifacts. For centuries, people have speculated about the whereabouts of the Templars' treasure, an alleged hoard of gold, relics, and sacred artifacts that was said to have been hidden before the order's dissolution. Many theories abound regarding the treasure's location, with suggestions ranging from the Holy Land to the vaults of Rosslyn Chapel in Scotland. The idea of a hidden treasure, protected by secret codes, symbols, and rituals, has captivated treasure hunters, historians, and mystics for generations. The search for this treasure has become a metaphor for the search for deeper spiritual truths, with the treasure itself symbolizing the hidden wisdom that the Templars guarded. One of the most enduring aspects of the Templar legacy is their connection to the Holy Grail. The Grail, long associated with Christian legend, has taken on a mystical significance in the context of Templar lore. Rather than being merely a physical object, the Grail is often seen as a symbol of divine knowledge, spiritual enlightenment, and the sacred feminine. The Templars, it is believed, were the guardians of this knowledge, preserving it through the ages and passing it on to future generations. The Grail, in this sense, represents the pursuit of ultimate truth, a truth that transcends religious dogma and reaches into the heart of the divine. The idea of the Grail as a metaphor for hidden wisdom and spiritual awakening is central to many modern interpretations of Templar history. The Templars' legacy also lives on in the realm of modern spiritual movements. Many contemporary spiritual traditions, including New Age philosophies and alternative religious practices, have adopted Templar symbols and teachings as part of their practices. These movements, which emphasize personal transformation, spiritual enlightenment, and the quest for hidden knowledge, often draw upon the Templar tradition to support their worldview. The idea of a hidden, secret knowledge that can lead to spiritual awakening remains a powerful draw for those seeking a deeper understanding of the mysteries of life. The enduring fascination with the Templars is a testament to the lasting impact of their legacy. Despite the efforts of the Church and the monarchy to suppress their influence, the Templars have remained a symbol of resistance to oppressive forces and a beacon of hidden wisdom. Their story, filled with mystery, intrigue, and sacred teachings, continues to inspire those who seek to uncover the truth about our spiritual heritage. The Templars' legacy is not just a relic of the past. It is a living, breathing force that continues to shape the way we understand history, spirituality, and the pursuit of knowledge.